I am Joe Legato with the Joe Legato Show, and we're going to be talking about America's fear. Why is America provoking a war with China and to a certain extent Russia as well? Well, the United States typically fears nations that have a large population and a lot of natural resources. And so the United States sees countries with a large population as potential rivals for power and influence in the world. Large populations can translate to large economies, and large economies can challenge the United States' economic dominance. And economic dominance underpins the United States model and the United States control. Countries with large populations can also have large militaries, which again can pose a threat to the United States' military superiority. Countries with a lot of resources can also be potential rivals for power and influence in the world. The United States is fearful of these countries because it sees them as being able to leverage their natural resources to become economic and political rivals to the United States. And so you see the United States having a long history of exploiting the resources of other countries, particularly in places like Latin America and the Middle East, in order to extract their resources without needing to pay fairly for them. The United States has a history of supporting coups, dictators, and other forms of intervention in these countries that possess resources that the United States wants to control. The United States has a particular interest in the global oil market, which has led to interventions in countries such as Iran, Iraq, and Venezuela. And that is not just a coincidence that they all have energy resources that the United States needs and wants. And the United States has also shown a willingness to use military force to protect its economic interests in resource-rich regions such as the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea. And so we're going to be showing you some pictures of this. So when it comes to destabilizing countries, we talked about the decline of the non-aligned movement, and the reason for the decline, at least partially, is because a leader of the non-aligned movement was Yugoslavia. And if you're a younger audience member, you probably don't remember Yugoslavia. It's a number of different countries now: Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, etc., etc. And you see here, after or before the collapse of the Soviet Union, a whole Yugoslavia, one of the leaders of the non-aligned movement, and then after the collapse, United States foments strife between various Slavic people who make up Yugoslavia, and the slow disintegration of Yugoslavia as a country over time. So 1991, 1992, and that is the final. This is the final slide here, right? April 28th, 1992. The complete disintegration of Yugoslavia as a union of various Slavic people. Okay? And this happens over and over and over again. You see here, we have a picture of Iraq, and you have the Kurds up north, you have Sunnis and Shias on the map, and Iraq was led by a Sunni, Saddam Hussein, and the country was kept relatively stable. Sectarian tensions they existed, ethnic tensions existed, but they were kept to a minimum under his reign. Again, there were various problems, but it got even worse after America took over in Iraq, and now there's a lot of tension between these various groups, and the Kurds are relatively autonomous at this point as a major American ally. But the United States focuses on things like divide and conquer tactics in order to turn populations against each other whenever it wants to exploit the population and extract the resources from the population. And we see here a picture of Ukraine. And this picture was a survey in 2003, where you can see that the Russian language in the east and south was dominant, and in the west it was less dominant. And we see even more of a breakdown. And this is actually by the Kyiv National Linguistic University in Kyiv, Ukraine in 2009. And even Kyiv, which is a major hub of Ukraine, because it is the capital of Ukraine, will admit that the Russian language is dominant throughout a lot of the country, and in Crimea in particular, not only do you have the Russian language being dominant, but you have people who are ethnically Russian being the dominant group in Crimea. And so the United States destabilizes populations, turns populations that are relatively similar to each other, such as in the case of Iraq, Yugoslavia, Ukraine, etc., they turn them against each other in order to extract those resources. So you see a lot of major American companies using the current Ukraine crisis in order to benefit from it. And here, a very important graph, we see various countries that are rich in natural resources, and you see clearly in first place is Russia with the most natural resources, and lo and behold, the United States is very, very, very antagonistic towards Russia. Okay, $75 trillion in natural resources. You see Saudi Arabia, which used to be a country that was under the thumb of the United States, but has now become a much more independent country, willing to trade oil in other currencies, such as local currencies, such as the yuan, Chinese yuan, things like that. Canada, again, another country subservient to the United States. So all these countries on this list are either subservient to the United States or have an antagonistic to the United States. The United States does not allow countries with a lot of resources to be neutral. They are either a threat that the United States is going to try to dominate, or they are already under the thumb of the United States. Then you see Iran here, 5th place in terms of the amount of natural resources worldwide. China, again, United States is antagonistic towards it. Brazil, United States destabilizes countries all across Latin America. I know Brazil is technically Portuguese, so not part of Latin America, but for the sake of this, let's just consider it a part of Latin America. United States destabilizes countries all across Central America and South America. Australia, again, another country under the thumb of the United States. Iraq, obviously a country that was invaded by the United States, and then Venezuela, a country under significant sanctions by the United States, really destabilizing the population, making the people suffer. And that's a common theme that we're going to talk about. The United States really benefiting from the suffering of people. If you visit my Twitter account, and I'm going to talk about this in a future segment, a future live stream, my pinned tweet is on how the United States benefits from the continued suffering of people. That's where it gets its resources from. That's how it wins, whether it's domestically benefiting from the suffering of people or internationally benefiting from the suffering of people. And so that is the last. Oh, I did want to show one more slide on here. So this is, again, Yugoslavia, talking about the splitting of the country, 1990, back when Yugoslavia was one country, and then 2015 when Yugoslavia was split into many different countries. And people typically say in modern times that, well, the United States couldn't split. There couldn't be a national divorce because people were spread all across the country, people on the right side of the spectrum, people on the left side of the spectrum. Well, you see here that people in 1990 were much more spread out, and then once national borders came about, those people ended up moving to be a part of the national border, or a part of the country that they want to be a part of. So just because people are spread out across America now does not mean that if there was a national divorce that those people wouldn't just migrate to the future nation state that they want to be a part of. So something to consider there. All right. So in terms of summaries, the U.S. fears countries with large populations and or a lot of resources. It primarily uses things like divide and conquer tactics to maintain control of countries like this. We'll be talking about various American tactics in a future segment. You can see that every country with a large population and or a lot of resources, the United States either has massive control over or works to destabilize. This includes Iran, Iraq, Venezuela, China, and Russia. It is no coincidence that these are all countries with large populations and a lot of resources.